Hello and welcome to another action-packed, exciting hour of the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Re-Watch-Along Project. This is podcasting the way it used to be and the way you like it. This show is a production of the Something Else Podcasting Network, and it is episode number 049 of Smoky Mountain Wrestling from January 2nd, 1993, taped question mark at question mark. So I'm thinking this episode, I'm fairly certain that this episode was taped at the December 12th, 1992 tapings at East High School in Morristown, Tennessee, in an empty arena. So probably, before they taped, maybe after. It doesn't really matter. The point is, it's a best of show. And I'll be honest, this may not be the longest episode in podcast history. But we're going to see where we go because we're talking about the 1992 year in review here on Smoky Mountain Wrestling this week. And yeah, we're going to go over some of the best stuff that we've seen. And there was a lot of really good shit this year. And of course, it's impossible to get all of it into an hour. So I strongly recommend checking out the last 48 episodes, every single solitary episode of the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Rewatch Along Project, which is available on angrymarks.com. It's available on YouTube, and it's also available on our RSS feed, which is being piped into pretty much every streaming platform that positively exists. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, etc. The only one that I right now know it's not on is TuneIn because for some weird reason TuneIn has some issues with uploading podcasts. So hopefully that'll come very shortly. But for now, we're just on everything but TuneIn. So if you're somebody who's going, oh man, I would subscribe to you if you were on TuneIn, just wait, because allegedly TuneIn is getting their issues fixed. So fingers crossed, tap on wood. All right. So it's a brand new year of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And what we do on this show is we watch every single episode of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, beginning with episode number 1 on February 1st, 1992. We go all the way to episode number 200 on November 26th, 1995. We talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, the so-so, the okay, the tremendous, the all right, the one of the kind, the out of this world, the memorable, the forgettable, the unbelievable, the I believed it because it didn't really happen. We talk about the matches, we watch some angles, we listen to some promos, and ultimately we just have fun, typically for an hour. This week's show is going to have an asterisk on that. But so that's what we normally do here on this week's show. And we're going to jump in here. We're going to go to the intro of the show with Bob Caudle. And this week's guest host actually is not Dutch Mantel, it is Jim Cornette.
Hi, wrestling fans, and welcome to our first program of Smoky Mountain Wrestling for the year 1993. Today we're going to go back and take a look at 1992 and review some of the greatest matches and some of our most memorable moments from Smoky Mountain's very first year. It's going to be an exciting program, fans. We hope you're going to stay right with us. And joining me to describe what you're going to be seeing is the manager of the Heavenly Bodies, Jim Cornette.
Well,
Jim?
you know, you didn't tell me you were going to devote the whole hour exclusively to me and Stan Lane and Tom Pritchard because memorable moments and great matches, well, that's all about Jim Cornette and the Heavenly Bodies. But you're right, Smoky Mountain Wrestling has made it the first year, man, and they've brought live professional wrestling back to East Tennessee, Eastern Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, all over the area. I've hated most of it because I don't like going to those places, but we're going to look today at some of the greatest things that have gone on in 1992 in Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
And Jim, and right you are. So fans, right now, let's go back to the beginning. That's a good place to start. Wouldn't you think, Jim? Commissioner Armstrong's first interview for our very first program. Here's wrestling legend Bullet Bob Armstrong, now Commissioner of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Bob, you bring over 30 years of experience to this job. What can we expect from you as Commissioner?
Well, you know, I have had over 30 years of wrestling experience, and I'd have every trick tried on me in the book. Right. And I've always been proud of my profession. It's been good to me and my family over the years. But what I've seen in the past few years, frankly, Mr. Caudle, I don't agree with. So when Smoky Mountain Wrestling Organization called me and said, would you like to be a commissioner, I thought, what a perfect opportunity to bring back to the people wrestling as it should be, as it used to be. I mean, wrestling affordable at family prices where the whole family can come and enjoy wrestling like it was invented. It's the oldest sport known to man, and it's going to be treated like a sport as long as I'm here. The fines will be not light but heavy. The fines will be heavy. For any infraction of the rule, there will be no over-the-top rope. There will be no foreign object. You will not touch a referee because there's a little man in there, a little referee that may weigh 150 pounds, getting pushed around by some big 290-pound guy. Well, I still wrestle sometime, Bob, and I can push around myself. So whatever needs to be done, Smoky Mountain Wrestling is going to do it. We want to be a part of your community. We want you to be a part of us. We want your cards and let us tell us what you want. I'm going to do my job as commissioner. I know it's not going to be easy. Don't get me wrong.
Well, they're going to test you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
they'll test me, but I'm up to the test. Smoky Mountain Wrestling will be the best.
Fans, there you hear it from Commissioner Bob Armstrong. It's going to be great, Smoky Mountain Wrestling. You be sure to be with us.
Okay, so I probably should have given you a heads up that we're going to play that Bullet Bob promo from episode number 1. But just to give you a heads up, there's not a lot of audio in this week's show. Obviously, we're just playing, we're just talking about the 1982 interview, so it's a lot of just, talking about shit that's already happened. So we got 3 audio clips. You just listen to one of them. So Cornette makes a joke that he didn't realize the whole hour would be about him and the Heavenly Body, since that's the best of Smoky Mountain Wrestling this year. And even though he's a heel, and even though you're not supposed to know that he's the owner and the guy in charge, you can just see the pride in his face and hear it in his voice when he's talking about, how they've made it through the first year. It's like, it's a tremendous feat. He basically created a company out of nothing. It's, in a lot of ways, it is a full-time territory. They haven't, it's not like, they are doing, 7 nights a week or anything like that. But they do a lot of, 2, 3, 4-day loops. And it's just going to get bigger from here. And, for all of the crap that, a lot of people like to give Jim Cornette, especially nowadays, it should be commended that, he's doing a great job here. And, hats off to him. So, back from commercial, and the first segment is about Mr. Ron Wright. And we were introduced to Mr. Ron Wright literally on the first episode. He's a poor old, crippled, retired wrestler who was just trying to impart his knowledge. And, he was trying to find a wrestler to help him make money so he could get his surgeries that he needs, so he can get out of his damn wheelchair and, maybe even be able to get back in the ring someday. And they show us highlights of all the times Mr. Ron Wright rolled to ringside and got involved. And we saw him allegedly give heels foreign objects to use. And it includes that time that Primetime Brian Lee grabbed it from Dutch Mantel and then got caught with it and got disqualified in the process. I'm going to play this here. One of my favorite interview segments from the early days of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Bullet Bob has something to say for Mr. Ron Wright, who we just mentioned has been interfering a lot.
Right. I've seen it. All the fans have seen it. He's been interfering in a number of matches.
That's exactly right. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and there you can see it. But Ron Wright has got a manager's license, so my hands are tied. There's nothing I can do. But he's got no right to come down to the ring when either man in the ring is not under contract to Ron Wright. So for that, I'm telling Ron Wright right now, I am banning you from the ringside, brother. Unless you get a contract with somebody, I want you to stay away from the ring. It's not fair to the wrestlers. If you're wrestling somebody, you have to look at him. You don't want to be looking at Ron Wright. It's not fair to the fans who are watching for Ron Wright to pull something in front of and missing some of the action in the ring. Yeah. So from now on, he is barred, Bob, and I do mean that.
Well, he can't. Wait a minute. Here is Mr. Ron Wright. And you heard that from the commissioner, I take it.
Listen, I'm hearing what you're saying, Mr. I can't believe that you'd come down here and try to mistreat a poor old crippled old man like me. You know I've been one of the most finest, upstanding gentleman wrestlers in my life. I've never harmed a man in my life in that ring. Here I've got a bad hip, and I'm just trying to...
Just a minute, brother. You've gone to... I ain't going to buy that garbage. Maybe some people you can feed that malarkey to, but you forget I know you, Ron Wright. I've been around you for more than 20 years. I've seen you wrestle. I've seen you take guys that are trying to get a start in this business and cripple them and mash them and maim them so bad that they couldn't even walk right. I got a scar in my head right now, and a knot on it that I'll have till the day I die. So you ain't fooling me. Now, I said that you're the rottenest, low-down, meanest wrestler that's ever been in the ring. And unless you get a contract with somebody, I said you're barred from this, and you are barred right now. You keep your manager's license, but keep your butt away from that ring.
Let me tell you something, Bob Armstrong. If
You ain't telling me nothing.
Man I was, I'd get up. If I had somebody to pick me up out of this...
Oh, fans. Hey, there goes Mr. Ron Wright, fans. He was...
All right. I just love that segment, and I just realized in the background as Bob is wheeling Mr. Orndorff away is fucking Dutch Mantel and Carl Stiles, who making his one and only appearance on the Best of show here this year, and for good reason. So it's early on in the day. This is before Dirty White Boy was officially, in the company and paired with Mr. Wright. We talked about Mr. Wright. He interfered in a whole bunch of matches. And so Bullet Bob said that while he does have a manager's license, until he actually gets a wrestler to manage, he's banned from ringside. And Mr. Wright rolls out to complain about how he's one of the finest, most upstanding gentleman wrestlers, and he's never harmed a man in his life. And now Bullet Bob is trying to, mess with him. And Bullet Bob, says he's not going to be fooled by Mr. Wright. He knows what Mr. Wright is capable of. He knows what Mr. Wright has done to other wrestlers in the past, including himself. And then Mr. Wright tries to argue back, and Bob's like, you know what, motherfucker, I'm done with you. And he, goes around, takes Mr. Wright's wheelchair and pushes it away. And, Ron Wright can't do anything about it. He can't stop Bob from pushing him away. And he's just, yelling and screaming and ranting and raving as Bob is just, pushing him to the back because, hey, he's now banned from the ringside area, and having him there would be a violation of that ban. So from here, they show the angle where Mr. Ron Wright confronts Tim Horner. I think this was in October or maybe early November. And it ended with, it was when Horner was trying to get title matches with Dirty White Boy. White Boy attacks him from behind and ends up, they hang him. And, he gets hung from the corner by White Boy, and they show probably a good 5 minutes of this. And we talked about when it happened. It's a really heavy angle. By the way, they introduced it by Cornette saying that he loves it. He loves seeing Horner hanging off the ring post. And you know something, Jim? We love it too. And like we said at the time, and we continue to say every week, it's too bad Horner can't cut his own promo. And it's too bad that the babyface manager is basically a useless position because, Horner, like we said, Horner is a really good wrestler. And, Horner can contribute a lot, especially when he's not trying to fuck with other people in the company. But he can't cut a promo to save his fucking life. And unfortunately, to some degree, this angle got ruined because it was being used for Horner. And Horner, like I said, isn't good enough to cut his own promo to vow revenge. And then, oh, for fuck's sake, they re-aired the Tim Horner personality profile. Now, in case, you weren't around in the early days of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and in case you don't know this story, Tim Horner thinks that he can sing. And I'm not saying that, he's, awful, but I'm saying, he probably is a pretty decent karaoke singer. That's about as far as you're going to get. And we literally, they show the entire thing from aired back in either March or April, And up until the singing part, it was what it was. It was, putting over Tim Horner, and they still do these to this day. We just talked more about one recently with Tracy Smothers. They show him doing, outside of the ring stuff. They talk about, his career, and they put him over as an athlete, somebody who's multi-talented. And to try to prove that he's multi-talented, they show him singing a Garth Brooks song. And they air like 2 or 3 minutes of this shit. And at the time, the first time it aired, Rick Rubin, who, in case you're somehow the only person in the world who doesn't know this, Rick Rubin is the person who financed Smoky Mountain Wrestling for most of its run. And he calls up Jim and is like, "Why is Tim Horner singing a Garth Brooks song on my TV show?" And Cornette basically had to apologize for it and, try to explain why he did it. And basically admit that, maybe they should have just aired, 10 or 15 seconds of it instead of the whole fucking 2.5, 3 minutes. And then they aired it again. So I'm going to bet that, Jim Cornette told Rick Rubin not to bother watching this week's tape because, damn, airing it once was bad enough, but they aired it twice. From here, we recap the Volunteer Slam back in May when Primetime Brian Lee became the first Smoky Mountain champion, beating Paul Orndorff in the finals. In case you forget, what happened was the referee got bumped. Dirty White Boy runs in to interfere. Orndorff tries using a foreign object. Bullet Bob takes over as the referee. Orndorff tries using the foreign object a second time, but Brian Lee blocked it. Bullet Bob catches Orndorff and disqualifies Orndorff, making Brian Lee the first Smoky Mountain champion by disqualification. And then they show the post-match chaos where the locker room empties for a giant brawl. Now, we said it at the time, we'll say it again. Having your first champion crowned by disqualification is questionable to say the least. That was not the greatest thing in the world. And in fact, I'm sure that's the reason why they had the end of the show giant ass brawl to try to distract you from the fact that you got a fuck finish in the main event. From there, they show the angle where Primetime Brian Lee is fighting Dirty White Boy, and Orndorff runs in with a briefcase. This was when Hector Guerrero was still there, so it's probably June. And this is when Hector Guerrero got hung over the top rope by his tie. And they tie the tie in a knot on the rope and hang him over the top. So, again, we've had 3 hanging angles in Smoky Mountain. There was the 2 we've now shown this one, and then there was one with the Fantastics and the Kolofs at the beginning of the era. I gotta tell you, that was a lot of hanging this year in Smoky Mountain. And also, what wasn't concentrated on for good reason was Mr. Ron Wright actually got out of his wheelchair to assist with Hector's hanging. Remember, you aren't supposed to remember that happened. Up next, we moved on to Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, and specifically about the ban of the pile driver. And then they showed the great angle, like, the Paul Orndorff goes crazy angle, where, this was his, like, he was never really a baby face, but this was his official heel turn in Smoky Mountain back in April when he's wrestling Hector Guerrero. He beats Hector Guerrero and he cheats to beat Hector. And then when Hector complained about it, he gave Hector a pile driver. Then Ben Jordan ran in, and Ben Jordan got dropped with a pile driver. Then Reno Riggins ran in, and Reno Riggins got dropped with a pile driver. And then Joey Maggs ran in, and Joey Maggs got dropped with a pile driver. And then Mr. Wonderful wasn't done yet. He went and grabbed a chair, and he put it on the mat, and he gives Hector a pile driver on the chair. It was just like, it was hilarious, just like one after a time. One, enhancement talent after another comes running out and gets dropped with a pile driver. And I don't remember how it ended because they cut it off there. I think Dixie Dynamite ran out to run off Orndorff. I could be wrong. It could have been Primetime Brian Lee. It could have been Robert Gibson. It could have been any of 100 people. Then they show part of Kevin Sullivan's debut where they attack Primetime Brian Lee and spike him over and over again in one of the most gruesome incidents in Smoky Mountain history. And it was also, you know, this was what they showed the second week, where they had the big censored mark over the front of Primetime Brian Lee. So they didn't actually show all of the blood cascading from his head. I believe this was also the last appearance of Malachi, who was one of the stalkers. We've went through a lot of stalkers this year, but this Night Stalker, Brian Clark, Atom Bomb, Wrath, whatever you want to call him, he appears to be sticking around for a little bit. From here, it was a cavalcade of stars as Corny and Cottle talk about all the big stars who have appeared in Smoky Mountain, and suddenly AEW Collision broke out because we get a music video set to Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. And basically, if you ever got promo time on this show, you were in this video. Like, legitimately. Like, and I was writing it down because I was like, figuring, hey, something might come of this. But Rip Rogers, Terry Gordy coming all the way from Freebird Mountain, the Maulers, the Wild Bunch, Hollywood Bob Holly, the Kolofs, Hector Guerrero, the Batten Twins, Barry Horowitz, Dixie Dynamite, Doug Furness, who I forgot even appeared on the show, the Party Patrol, Joe Kazana, Nitro Danny Davis, Buddy Landell, even though he left on bad terms, Paul Orndorff, Brian Lee, Tim Horner, Rock and Roll Express, Ronnie Garvin, Killer Kyle, Dirty White Boy, Stud Stable, Tracy Smothers, and the Night Stalker. It's a 3-minute music video, and they managed to get every human being who, I didn't even say got a push, because Rip Rogers didn't really get a push, but I guess he did that angle with Horner the one week, but that's about it. But anyway, like I said, if you ever got promo time on this show, you were in this video. And from here, I'm going to play our last bit of audio we're going to play. We're moving on to the tag team division. And if you recall, early on, there was a mystery over who was going to be Jim Cornette's team, who's going to be his new tag team. And they did a whole bunch of skits with Jim Cornette, who's going to take Phil Rainey, who's a reporter who, does occasional backstage interviews for the company. They were going to, he was taking Phil Rainey to the location where the Heavenly Bodies were, and then shenanigans would occur. So we're going to play that here. Like I said, it's our last bit of audio we're going to play, but that's going to including one of the skits from, I think March. Let's go to that now.
Well, here's where you wanted to be. The tag team scene of 1992. And it wouldn't have been the same, I know, without you and the Heavenly Bodies. But Jim, at first you had trouble introducing them.
Well, you see, the problem was, for all you people that joined Smoky Mountain Wrestling a little late, when I was trying to introduce the Heavenly Bodies, nobody knew who it was. And I took the camera crew out, and we tried to do some location videos showing the people who the Heavenly Bodies were. But you see, they're always mobbed by so many screaming, adoring women that we couldn't get a moment's peace and quiet to do anything right. I mean, these women, they were finding us everywhere. Hotels, restaurants, wherever we go. Well, take a look at one of the videos. You'll see what I mean.
Tennessee, where Jim Cornette has promised to you wrestling fans and to the world his tag team.
Now, how does it feel, Randy, first of all, to be in the lap of luxury like this, to be in this opulence, to be in these surroundings? You're not used to stuff.
I'm really impressed.
You drive an Opel Kadett, don't you? Well, what I'm here today to do is let you in on a big moment in history. You are fixing to meet up with the greatest tag team in the universe. I am taking you to their exclusive training location. They are out right now working on strategy, training, working out, and we're going to be there in just a few minutes, and you are going to see the next Smoky Mountain Wrestling Tag Team Champions. As a matter of fact, hey, we're coming up on the training location now. Hey, isn't that great? Look at that.
Hooters, that's not a training location.
Hey, these guys do their best work there. Hey, driver, Herd, pull over to the side. Boy, this guy's a lousy driver. Okay, Rainey, now listen up. You're going to meet the greatest tag team in the universe today. I've gone to a lot of trouble, a lot of expense to make sure we have a nice, quiet little interview. I've rented the whole place out so we won't be disturbed. So what I want you to do is watch your table manners. Don't order anything too expensive, and we'll have a nice, quiet little interview if you won't interrupt us.
All right.
Now let's get on over here and find out.
The party's already started, guys. Come on in.
Party.
Party? I didn't ask for any party. I just wanted a nice, quiet interview.
I can't believe we're already here.
What the heck?
They're here. They're here.
Grady, let's get to the bottom of this. Have you spilled the beans?
You brought me out here for a quiet interview.
You spilled the beans.
There's no way. Cornette, you're trying to get... I can't see anybody. There's no way in the world I'm going to risk my life going in that melee. We'll have to do this interview some other time. I am not going to get involved in all of that.
Okay. So it was a fun little skit, and they did like 3 or 4 of them. They did one, I remember, at a hotel. They did one where like, his tag team was just going to be standing in the middle of the parking lot, and then women came running over, to assault them. And they were all basically the same thing. They go to the training location where Jim's team is working out, which was Hooters, and Phil Rainey just completed it by yelling, "Hooters!" Just tremendous. Also, the limo driver, in case you didn't hear, his name was Herd. Yes, like Jim Herd, because this was also right after Herd got let go from his position running WCW. So, of course, the inside joke is, well, he got a job now as a limo driver. So, Courtney, they go into Hooters, and Courtney's just trying to, psych up Rainey, tell him what he's about to see when, all these Hooter girls go running by saying they're here and the party has started. And we go in and we see a booth, but we see, all these Hooters girls mobbing around the booth to the point where we cannot see poor Jim Cornette's team. Oh, wow. Oh, darn. Oh, golly gee. Now, of course, it ended up being the Heavenly Bodies, as we know. And we see some highlights here. They show us Heavenly Bodies versus the Fantastics, the tag team title match from TV back in May, which Heavenly Bodies won to become the first champions, which was just a preview of the amazing feud we would see over the summer of '92. And then they show us the post-match angle where the Heavenly Bodies injured Jackie Fulton's knee. They then show us the entire backstage fight from June, and this was when they did a house show. It ended in some sort of bullshit finish, and then they fought the entire back hallway. It's like 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes, and it was a street fight, I think, in July, and it was just really, really good shit. Cornette was getting involved too, and he got bumped in the hallway, and eventually they go outside. The Heavenly Bodies jump into Cornette's car, and one of the Fultons destroys the back windshield of the car. If you haven't seen it, trust me, it's a must-see. It's a fantastic one-shot promo with one camera, no editing, and it was just real. And, I'm not saying anything now isn't real, but, like, nowadays, if you did a backstage fight, there would be, 3 cameramen, a whole bunch of, flipping all over the place, and there'd be no legitimate reason why nobody was coming by to break it up. Like this one, they had the reason. What was going on was Phil Rainey was, doing a recap for the show. The show was over, so the arena was empty. And, well, the arena wasn't quite empty because here are the Heavenly Bodies and Rock and Roll Express, and they get into this, or not the Rock and Roll Express, with the Fantastics, and they get into this huge ass fight. And yeah, it made complete sense. Also, why would there be 3 cameras there, to just do a wraparound with Phil Rainey, right? So anyway, Cornette, we go back to the desk, and Cornette says he really wants to see more tag team clips involving the Heavenly Bodies. So Cotto was nice enough to show clips of the Rock and Roll Express, which caused Cornette to do a spit take, wasting valuable sprites. And actually, Cotto lied at first, as they didn't show Rock and Roll Express beating Heavenly Bodies. They showed several minutes of their debut against the Stud Stable from back in August at Fire on the Mountain. Then they showed the angle where Morton showed a picture of a dog in curlers and glasses, saying it's Mama Cornette. which was the angle that led to Cornette allowing the Rock and Roll Express to get tag team title matches again, which of course he's lived to regret since. And then we finish up with the angle where they had a tag team title match, but Gibson was late getting to the building, so it was a 2-on-1 handicap match. But Gibson came in at the end. It featured Morton waylaying Pritchard's sweaty back with a tennis racket, which made a great noise, if nothing else. And it had, the Rock and Roll Express breaking Robert Gibson's hand, which was the whole key that, now Gibson can't talk to his mom, who's a deaf mute, and another heavy angle. And that was it. That brings us to the end of the show. And I mean, if you haven't watched Smoky Mountain the whole year, this was a great way of reminding you of everything that you may have missed. And hey, it was a good episode. It sets the stage for 1993. And it tells us that next week's main event is Dirty White Boy and Paul Orndorff versus Ronnie Garvin and Tim Horner. And it's not highlights from Christmas Chaos. It's a new actual match. Because I was thinking, hey, they're just gonna re-air, they're just gonna air clips from Christmas Chaos, but that's not what happens. So that's it for this week's episode. Again, if you haven't watched, Smoky Mountain, this was a great show to watch because it brings you up to date with everything, and goes from there. So we're 49 down. We have 151 to go. And somehow we've got about 31 minutes. But, yeah, so 31 minutes. Before we finish things up here, we're actually going to also talk about what else is happening this week in wrestling. And the big news is that Ric Flair has received his release from the WWF and will be returning to WCW after April 15th. It is expected that the contract is for more than the $1,000 per night maximum that Bill Watts claimed you would pay somebody, and it more than likely also doesn't include the 4-month contract review period that Watts said he'd put in all wrestlers' contracts. He is expected to come in as a babyface and feud with Barry Windham and Vader. Speaking of Vader, Vader won the WCW World title from Ron Simmons on December 30th in Baltimore, and Great Muta won the NWA title from Masachono on the second annual New Japan January 4th Tokyo Dome show. And it's a tradition that's still going 31 years later. Simmons had no show the December 29th Philadelphia show that was allegedly going to be the title change itself, and now his future in WCW is in question. So that is going to do it for this week's episode. And, again, it's a best of show, but I hope you still enjoyed it anyway. I want to thank everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you again in 7 days.